live. All right. So, hey, everyone, this is Chris Berry with Castle Wealth Group, and we do these weekly wisdom webinars every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and then they're recorded and they are shared on our YouTube screen or YouTube channel. And these are really ran by you. It's just whatever questions you either submit during the week, which you can always just reply back to the email that sends you the invite to this with whatever questions you have. Or if you do have questions and you want them answered live as we're going through this, I answer those questions live. So it's kind of like open office hours. And I always like to start with a positive focus. And a lot of my positive focuses have been around family recently, and more specifically, coaching my kids in soccer. That just brings me so much joy to be able to coaching. And I have my dad coaching with me. So it's like 3 generations of Barrys out there coaching. But my daughter had a game. My son's game was canceled. One of the kids on the other team got COVID, so the whole team's quarantined. But we won't get into that. But my daughter had an amazing game. Their team, we were down 1-0, and then we came back in the second half at once. So that's pretty cool. So that's my positive focus. I like to always start with something positive, get the ball rolling. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. So give me a second as I hit these buttons. And now we should see my screen. All right. So this is general information. If you want to see how this applies to your situation, just reply back to the email or give our office a call and we'll figure it out. So I see Mike just submitted a question, so we'll add that. So I had 2 questions ahead of time. So the first one is, we just sold our house for $350,000. So it's a good time to sell. What are some safe investments we can look at for our money? We think we need about $100,000 over the next year or so. So really, this is getting into kind of income planning and investment planning. And I like to kind of use visuals. So when we're talking about income planning, I like to differentiate between what we think we might need like now, like in year 1, versus maybe years 1 through 5 or 1 to 10, and then 10 plus. So if we think we might need 100,000 over the next year or so, I put that in that now bucket of money. And now bucket of money should be things like whatever your emergency fund is, which is typically 6 months worth of expenses, whatever big expenses you have planned for the year. So if you're doing home improvements or taking a big trip, assuming you could travel somewhere. And then if you're in retirement, you may have an income gap where you look at your fixed income coming in from Social Security, pensions, or annuities, and compare that to your expenses. And if there's more expenses than income, you know that you're going to have to draw on your assets. So ideally, that money should be sitting really at the bank, checking savings. So of that 350, okay, let's just put 100,000. That's just going to checking savings. Okay. And then we have later money that can be generally invested more aggressively than that sooner bucket of money. So now that we have their income need covered for the next year, what can we do with the rest of it? Well, I always like to kind of go back to your investment options. So any investment really only has 2 out of 3 characteristics, and you can only pick 2 out of those. So most people want their money to grow, especially given the potential inflation we're experiencing. Like they're talking about Social Security cost of living adjustment being about 6% next year, which is unheard of. Usually it's around 2.6%. But just look at the gas prices, they're going up. So we need our money to grow. And then you worked hard for your money, so you want safety. You don't want to lose your money. And then we also need liquidity. So we want to get access to our funds. And so typically when we're talking about this, most investments really only have 2 out of 3 characteristics, but I'm going to show you something that actually has all 3. And I don't do this often where I focus on a tool, but it is kind of an interesting new tool where you can actually have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. So what's money that's safe and liquid? This is money that you have at the bank, right? What are you earning on this? Typically less than like 1%, not even keeping up with inflation. So again, this is that now bucket of money. So this might be your cash, right? This money isn't working for you. Sometimes we call this lazy money, right? You don't want to have too much here because you're not getting any growth. So then what's money that's geared towards growth and liquidity? This is having money in the market, right? And we can have aggressive portfolios or conservative portfolios. Typically, we assess what we call a risk score to this. So how much risk are you willing to take on for that return? So the greater the risk, the higher the potential return. But especially short term, you might see big ups and big downs depending on how the market's doing, right? And that kind of market side of things kind of goes like that over time. And then we have things that are geared towards growth and safety. So this is where, like, short term, you have things like CDs, but CDs are only getting you maybe 1% right now, really not worth it. And then kind of on a longer time horizon, you have things like fixed index annuities and index universal life, where typically you're not going to want to touch these for at least 3 years, sometimes even longer. But here you might get good 5 to 7% rate of return. So if we have, say, 100,000 going here, then it's a matter of how much do we want to go over here versus over here. And that's where we get into kind of the goals. Now, there is something that kind of does all three of these things, where you can have growth with at least a guaranteed 2.5% rate of return. You can have 100% liquidity, and then you also have safety. And it's a tool called Legacy Excel. I don't want to get too much into it, but if you do have, say, lazy money, and you'd like maybe a 2.5% rate of return, if not greater, and you also want liquidity, it is a relatively unique tool that we have right now that, especially, it's better than any CDs out there. So in this situation, depending on what we're doing, that might be one of the tools that we would look at, is something that has 100% liquidity, guarantees at least 2.5% rate of return. So you get at least some growth, could be higher, and then it's guaranteed not to lose. You do have to be over 59.5 to do something like that, but that's something you're interested in, just let us know. But when the question came in, that was something that I replied back with. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, when we're doing this, it's all about what are your goals, and then let's figure out the strategy, and then figure out which tools. So that's where, again, a lot of the questions, if you were to ask me, is it depends. It depends on what your goals are. So, all right. So that's first one. Now, second one, we have a ladybird deed. Should I be adding our trust to our homeowner's insurance? So first, we need to talk about what a ladybird deed is. It's a type of deed that says it's in your name while you're alive, and then upon death, it avoids probate and either goes into your trust or goes to your beneficiaries, depending on how that ladybird deed was put together. Ladybird deed, named after Lady Bird Johnson, and it was created by a law professor who wrote a book or a treatise on different types of deeds and named them after celebrities, just to kind of have some fun with it. So ladybird deed, really, it's an enhanced life estate deed. Think of it like a beneficiary designation for your home or any other piece of real estate. So it's still in your name. You can refinance it, do whatever you want, but then upon death, then it goes to whoever the beneficiary is. So the question is, with regards to the homeowner's insurance policy, really, while you're alive and well, you are the only one that needs to be on the account. But then upon death, what I would recommend is a call to your property and casualty person, because then you would want to make sure that now, if you have that home, well, guess what? You're not the owner anymore. Now it might be owned by that trust. So it's probably a good idea to call your property and casualty insurance person to make sure that that trust is listed on the policy. Another reason I'm always telling people to talk to their property and casualty person is because of umbrella policies. I'm a big fan of umbrella policies as a way to limit liability. An umbrella policy will cover kind of all those issues that maybe aren't covered by, like, your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance. If you were to get sued for whatever reason, that's where that umbrella policy comes into play. Typically, you're looking like at $1 million of coverage. typically going to cost you maybe $200 to $300 per year. So it's super cheap to add on just more coverage. I always recommend that you have your umbrella policy up to whatever your net worth is. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't replace like an asset protection trust, because all you're doing is you're building sandbags, versus when we create an asset protection trust, we're building a wall around your assets. But still, I like to have those sandbags, which would be that defense lawyer defending kind of your house against any claims. But still, ideally, if you're concerned about liability protection, the asset protection trust is the best way to go. But still, the umbrella policy, it's super cheap. It's a way to get some additional defense if you're concerned about liability. All right, so those were the two questions I had submitted ahead of time. Now another question came in, so let me address that. And again, if you do have any questions or if anything's unclear, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat. If you have a joint, let me see. All right, so if you have a joint bank account, so let's say we have a joint bank account, and if you have a joint account at a bank, can funds you have in the bank be attached if it's only in my name? Okay, so maybe you can clarify the question. So we have a joint account at the bank, and then what do we have, an individual account as well? Maybe if you can type in some clarification. But let's assume that we have two accounts. So we have the joint account, and let's say these are both at the bank, and then we have the individual accounts, right? So with a joint account, you have two people on it at least, right? Individual account, you have just yourself. So I think what the question is getting at here, and feel free to correct me by typing it in. If let's say you're joint on this account and one of these people were to get a divorce, a lawsuit, creditor action, bankruptcy, and you're joint on the account, what can happen is you can lose that account. That's why we're not a big fan of joint ownership. Joint ownership is great for a married couple, but I wouldn't recommend naming anyone else ever on your accounts. Well, not ever. There are certain reasons why we do sometimes. So again, with everything, it's like there's exceptions to the rule, but the general rule is don't add someone to your joint to an account jointly unless they're your spouse. There's almost always a better way to do it. But let's say you have a joint account and an individual account at the same bank, and whatever reason someone is sued or needs long-term care, you would lose that joint account, but the individual account would be protected. Okay. So by naming someone joint, it doesn't open them up to like all of your accounts, just the accounts that you hold joint with someone else. So hopefully that answered your question, and feel free to type in some clarification if it didn't. All right. But yeah, that's one of the biggest mistakes I see is joint ownership. Really not a good fan of that. There's always a better way to handle things with joint ownership. Okay, another question just came in. If someone is in the hospital, unable to communicate without a POD for medical or financial or will, what can we do? All right, so any comprehensive estate plan, typically we're doing a trust, not always, but typically we do, and a will. These two things typically handle like after death issues. And then we need what we call disability documents. And that's going to be a financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney. Sometimes we do what's called a personal care plan. Sorry for all the acronyms. Financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, personal care plan. So we call these disability documents. Okay. So these are the documents that point to someone to make financial decisions, medical decisions if you're unable to. These typically handle after death issues, but the trust can also handle issues while you're alive, including asset protection. So understand that by creating this comprehensive estate plan, what you're doing is you're creating your rule book. All right. And most people want to rely on the rules that they create versus relying on the government's rule book. Well, the government's rule book is probate. And there's two types of probate. So you can have probate upon death, That's where you didn't title things properly, and now someone's left in some deceased person's name. And then you can also have probate while living. And probate while living takes two forms. One is a guardianship. So that's going to make decisions with regards to someone's care. And then if you happen to have money, and I forget what the limit is now, I think it's 100,000, then you also need a conservatorship. Okay. Where now, at the end of the day, it's going to be the judge who's deciding everything. They might let you make some decisions, but now you have to run everything through the courts and the judge. So if you have someone in a hospital and they're unable to communicate and they don't have their own rule book, then you're probably going to have to go to court and petition the court for a guardianship or a conservatorship. Our office doesn't specifically handle that, but you can contact us and we'll get you in contact with one of our attorneys that do handle those guardianships or conservatorships. Our job, we try to keep people out of court. That's why we focus so much on the planning side of things. Mike writes in, thank you. So I did hit the joint account question properly. All right. Should homeowners policies be in the name of the revocable trust if your deed is in the name of the revocable trust? Okay, so we have a revocable living trust and the deed is in the name of the revocable living trust. So depending on the situation, typically I'm not a big fan of this. If you have a revocable living trust, typically instead what we're going to do is we're going to do the ladybird deed to say that it's still in your name while alive, and then only upon death does it go to the revocable living trust. There's a couple of reasons why that we do that. First, with a married couple, you're destroying some asset protection nature that married couples have through what's called tenancy in the entireties by putting it into a revocable living trust. Second, if you have to refinance, sometimes they'll want you to take it out of that revocable trust. But yeah, with regards to the homeowner's insurance, if you have it owned by the trust, I'd recommend that you have the trust as an additional insured. But again, I typically wouldn't put it directly into the revocable trust in the first place. Another question. If I do a guardianship or conservatorship, do I have to pay the bills left behind should they pass away? So this is getting back to, okay, the court appoints me as guardian or conservator. Both of these, you're not liable for the bills, but you are a fiduciary, meaning you have to act on behalf of the person. But if you are a fiduciary, it's not like you're not responsible if they have debts or liabilities or that type of thing. You're just helping manage it. So similar with a financial power of attorney. By serving as financial power of attorney, you're not taking on the liabilities of the person. The only liability you have is to act in their best interest. But if there is like a mortgage or something, you're not liable, or you're not liable for the credit card debt that they had. So that's a big thing, is you're serving as a fiduciary. You're not serving as that person. That's the big difference. It's not like you're inheriting their money. You're not inheriting the money. The money might be going in a different direction. You're just serving as a fiduciary for that money. So, all right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I knocked down everything that came in. I appreciate the questions. Keeps me on my toes. All right, thank you. You are welcome. Yep, here's a new one. If the deed of our house is in the name of our irrevocable trust, should we contact our insurance company? Yeah, I would recommend it. Yeah, you should have the asset protection trust listed as additional beneficiary. They might have some questions. Sometimes it's more like pain than it's worth. But I've never had a situation where the insurance company hasn't paid out if something happened because it was in the name of the trust. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, wish me luck. My kids have 2 games this weekend on Saturday. So my girls are at the top of the league. My boys are at the bottom. Oh, here's another one. I am the executor. Can a family member remember, make me settle in 6 months. So if you're an executor, that means that it's went through probate. Otherwise, because the term executor refers to what you're appointed through the will and probate court versus serving as a trustee. So if you're a trustee, that's appointed through trust and that's not going through court. If you're an executor or personal representative, that means you're going through probate. Okay, this is for a trust. Okay. So either way, typically the question is, do they have to force you to handle everything within 6 months? No, you really have at least a year typically before someone should start questioning like, hey, what's going on? Because like with probate, for example, the minimum, the quickest you can get through probate is 5 months in Michigan. And typically it takes longer than that. With a trust, you can get things done quicker. But even like when you publish a notice to publishers or notice to creditors in a paper to cut off any potential claims, that runs for 4 months. So to say that family members are forcing you to get everything done within 6 months, I'd tell them to back off. Typically, if it's over a year, then it's probably dragging on a little bit. But yeah, so I would say most estates, you can settle quicker if it's pretty simple, but especially if there's real estate involved, then it can drag out a little bit. Even if you have a trust, because you have to, all right, someone passes away, they have a house, you have to do an estate sale, you have to find a realtor, you have to put it up for sale, you have to go through that whole process. So yeah, I think forcing you to settle in quicker than 6 months, that's a little aggressive. Even for a trust, you certainly can. Like when I talk to clients, I say, yeah, if everything's titled properly and assuming we don't have real estate, like everything can be wrapped up typically within a month or so. With a financial accounts, if everything is titled and everything's already organized, set up from the beginning. But no, forcing you to settle within 6 months, that's a little aggressive. So, all right. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you so much. Feel free to share this webinar. We do it every week. You can go to wisdomwebinar.com to register. If there's anyone that you think might benefit, feel free to let them know about it or even register them and just give them a heads up. But with that, make it a great week.